The Indian in the Cupboard, Chapter 10, Breakfast Truce. He crept downstairs. The house was still asleep. He decided to cook breakfast for himself and his cowboy and Indian. He was quite a good cook, but he'd mostly done sweet stuff before. However, any fool, he felt sure, could fry an egg. The steaks were out of the question, but beans were no problem. Omri put butter in the frying pan on the stove. The fat began to smoke. Omri broke an egg into it, or tried to, but the shell, instead of coming cleanly apart, crumpled up somehow in his hand and landed in the hot fat, mixed up with the egg. Not as easy as he'd thought. Leaving the mess to cook, shell and all, he got a tin of beans out of the cupboard and opened it without trouble. Then he got a saucepan and began pouring beans in. Some of them got into the egg pan somehow and seemed to explode. The egg was beginning to curl and the pan was still smoking. Alarmed, he turned off the heat. The center of the egg still wasn't cooked and the beans in the pan were stone cold. But the smell in the kitchen was beginning to worry him, and he didn't want his mother coming down. He tipped the whole lot into a bowl, hacked a lopsided slice off the loaf of bread, and tiptoed upstairs again. Little Bear was standing outside his long house with hands on hips waiting for him. "You bring food?" he asked in his usual bossy way. "Yes." "First, Little Bear want ride. First, you must eat while it's hot." "I've been to a lot of trouble cooking it for you," Omri said, sounding like his mother. Little Bear didn't know how to take this, so he burst into a rather forced laugh and pointed scornfully at Omri. "Omri cook! Omri woman!" he teased. But Omri wasn't bothered. "All the best cooks are men," he retorted. "Come on, you're going to eat with Boone." Little Bear's laughter died instantly. "Who Boone?" "You know who he is, the cowboy." The Indian's hands came off his hips, and one of them went for his knife. "Oh, knock it off, Little Bear. Have a truce for breakfast, otherwise you won't get any." Leaving him with that thought to chew on, Omri crossed to the crate in which Boone was grooming his white horse. With a wisp of cloth he'd found clinging to a splinter, he'd taken off the little saddle, but the bridle was still on. "Boone, I've brought something to eat," said Omri. "Yup, I thought I smelt something good," said Boone. "Let's get to it." Omri put his hand out. "Climb on." "Aw, shucks, where am I going?" "Why can't I eat in my box where it's safe?" whined Boone. He clambered up onto Omri's palm and sat grumpily with his back against his middle finger. "You're going to eat with the Indian," said Omri. Boone leaped up so suddenly he nearly fell off and had to grab hold of a thumb to steady himself. "Hell no I ain't," he yelled. "You just put me down, son, you hear? I ain't sharing my vittles with no lousy scalp-snarfling Indian. And that's my last word." It was, as it happened, his last word before being set down within 6 inches of his enemy on the seed tray. They both bent their legs into crouches as if uncertain whether to leap at each other's throats or turn and flee. Omri hurriedly spooned up some egg and beans and held it between them. "Smell that," he ordered. "Now you eat together, or you don't get any at all, so make up your minds to it. You can start fighting again afterwards if you must." He took a bit of clean paper and laid it like a tablecloth under the spoon. Then he broke off some crumbs of bread crust and pushed a little into each of their hands. Still, with their eyes fixed on each other's faces, Indian and cowboy sidled toward the big steaming bowl of food from opposite sides. Little Bear, after hesitating, was first to shoot his arm out and dip the bread into the egg. The sudden movement startled Boone so much he let out a yell and tried to run, but Omri's hand was blocking the way. "Don't be silly, Boone," he said firmly. "I ain't being silly. Them Indians ain't just ornery and savage, them's dirty, and I ain't eatin' from the same bowl as no—" "Boone," said Omri quietly, "Little Bear is no dirtier than you. You should see your own face." "Is that my fault? What kind of hallucination are you anyway, telling me I'm dirty when you don't bring me no washing water?" This was a fair complaint, but Omri wasn't about to lose the argument on a side issue. "You can have some after breakfast. But if you don't agree to eat with my Indian, I'm going to tell him your nickname." The cowboy's face fell. "Now that ain't fair. That plumb ain't no ways fair," he muttered. But hunger was getting the better of him anyway, so, grumbling and swearing under his breath, he turned back and marched to his side of the spoon. By this time, Little Bear was seated cross-legged on the piece of paper, a hunk of bean in one hand and a mess of egg in the other, eating heartily. Seeing this, Boone lost no time in tucking in, eyeing the Indian, who ignored him. "Where's my coffee?" he complained after he'd eaten a few bites. I can't start the day till I've had my jug of coffee. Omri had completely forgotten about coffee, but he was beginning to be pretty well fed up of being bossed around by ungrateful little men, so he settled down to eat the remains of the food and simply said, "Well, you'll just have to start this one without any." Little Bear finished his breakfast and stood up. "Now we fight," he announced, and reached for his knife. Omri expected Boone to leap up and run, but he didn't. He just sat there munching bread and beans. "I ain't finished yet," he said. "Ain't gonna fight till I'm plumb full of victuals, so you can just sit down and wait, Redskin." Omri laughed. "Good for you, Boone. Take it easy, Little Bear. Don't forget your promise." Little Bear scowled, but he sat down again. Boone ate and ate. It was hard not to suspect after a while that he was eating as much and as slowly as possible to put off the moment when he would have to fight. At last, very reluctantly, he scraped the last bit of egg from the spoon, wiped his hands on the sides of his trousers, and stood up. Little Bear was on his feet instantly. Omri stood ready to part them. "Look here, Injun," said Boone. "If we're going to fight fair. Probably ain't even a word for fair in your language, but I'm here to tell you with me it's fight fair or don't fight at all. Little Bear fight fair, kill fair, scalp fair. You ain't going to scalp nobody, less'n you take it off with your teeth." For answer, Little Bear raised his knife, which flashed in the morning light. Omri, his hands on his knees, waited. "Yeah, I see it, but you ain't gonna have it much longer. And why ain't you? Because I ain't got one. I only got my gun, and my gun's plumb run out of bullets. What I got, and all I got, is my fists. Oh, and one other thing. I got my hallucination here." He waved a hand at Omri without taking his eyes off Little Bear for a second. And I know he don't want to see this here purty red scalp of mine hanging from no stinking redskin's belt. So if I fight, it's gonna be fist to fist, face to face, man to man, Injun. Do you hear me? No weapons, just us two. Then let's see if a white man can't lick a red man in a fair fight. Less'n maybe, just maybe, you ain't red at all, but yeller." And Boone stepped around the bowl of the spoon, threw his empty gun on the ground, and put up his fists like a boxer. Little Bear was nonplussed. He lowered his knife and stared at Boone. Whether Little Bear had completely understood the cowboy's strange speech was doubtful, but he couldn't mistake the gesture of throwing the gun away. As Boone began to dance around him, fists up, making little mock jabs toward his face, Little Bear was getting madder and madder. He made a sudden swipe at him with his knife. Boone jumped back. "Oh, you naughty Indian, I see. I'll have to set my hallucination on you." But Omri didn't have to do anything. Little Bear had got the message. Throwing down the knife in a fury, he hurled himself onto Boone. What followed was not a fistfight or a wrestling match or anything so well organized. It was an all-in, no-holds-barred two-man war. They rolled on the ground, pummeling, kicking, and butting with their heads. At one point, Omri thought he saw Boone trying to bite. Maybe he succeeded because Little Bear suddenly let him go, and Boone rolled away, swift as a barrel down a slope onto his legs, and then, with a spring like a bow-legged panther, onto the Indian again, feet first. Little Bear let out a noise like, "Oof!" He caught Boone by both ankles and heaved him off. Little Bear picked up a clod of compost and flung it after him, catching him full in the face. Then Little Bear got up and ran at him, holding both fists together and swinging them as he had swung the battle axe. They caught the cowboy a heavy whack on the ear, which sent him flying to one side. But as he flew, he caught Little Bear a blow in the chest with one boot that left them both on the ground. The next moment, each of the men found himself pinned down by a giant finger. "All right, boys, that's enough," said Omri in his father's firm end-of-the-fight voice. "It's a draw. Now you must get cleaned up for school." And that is the end of Chapter 10.